Welcome to Game Film, where we dive deep into the minds of advisors and industry leaders. In each episode, we uncover the stories behind their victories and achievements, offering you invaluable insights and lessons to help you grow and succeed. So, sit back, relax, and let's roll the film.
Hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Jordan Hutchison, and today I have Lindsey Lewis on the podcast. She is the managing director at the American College, and she is also the chair for Center for Women in Financial Services. Lindsey, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I've been super excited.
I was very excited about this chat. I know that we haven't known each other long, but we were introduced from a very amazing mutual friend. And I'm very happy to see that you took part and actually wore a jersey today. So thank you for playing the part.
Not only did I wear a jersey, I wore the jersey that I wore when I got my PR in track and field. So we're real repping. Also, Utah Valley switched to Nike, so this is old school with an Adidas brand. So that's my little hot take.
So you got the retro, which is can't get in more. It's the exclusive, so that no one can get them anymore.
Not mint condition, though.
Yeah. Lightly used. People that might know my research, they might not. I've always been a big fan, and I was a researcher in a thing called flow theory. So I always love to hear, like, what would be your come out or walk out song? And you might have had one when you were playing sports, but AK, what's that like hype song that gets you in the zone, that gets you like focused?
So I have my pregame song or songs. So Not Like Us, Kendrick Lamar, definitely have to have that on repeat.
That is a great one.
New Level by Asap Ferg, got to have that. If I'm at a women's event, I don't think there's anything that slaps harder than Shania Twain saying, "Let's go girls," and "Man, I Feel Like a Woman." So that's one. And then I absolutely love Church Girl by Beyonce. So any of those, I'll walk out. I feel prepared. I'm ready. I attend a lot of women's events, so it's really fun. The thing that annoys me is like when they only have male artists and we're at women's events, I'm like, wait, where am I?
Give us some time. Shannon Spotswood is the same one. She actually was one of our early, I think our first guest on here. She actually came in playing her song before we ever started to make sure that everyone in the studio was in the same vibe as her. So I love those songs, and I know all of those songs, and those are great. So I love it. I want everyone to know more of like what you're working on, because you do a lot of great work in the industry, and I think that you've got an amazing lens of where the industry is going. So let's jump right in on some of the. I got a few questions teed up for you. So first, before we jump into some of your specifics, I always think it's interesting how we all came into this industry. So how did you get into the financial services profession?
So I have a unique story that I'm really trying to help other folks have and replicate it more frequently. So I actually did a CFP undergrad program. So you take all of the coursework materials that you need to sit for the CFP, and you actually can take the CFP exam your senior year of college. So that was just such a slingshot and a jumpstart for me within financial services. My mom was an accountant. My dad was a life insurance agent. So like naturally, I guess that's what happened. Growing up, prior to college, I thought I was going to go medical routes because I was in athletics and I was like, loved, all the aspect. But then I was like doing the calculation of like what the ROI of the amount of time. And I knew that I wanted to be an income producing parent. And so I was like, oh, it's going to take me 12 years to get through medical school. But if I go this route, I can make 6 figures even faster. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I am like doing financial planning, like trying to decide what I want to do with my future. So hopped into that CFP registered program and really started to experience kind of that gender divide that happens within financial services within that program. Sure. So in my graduating class, we were one of the first people to finish the personal financial planning degree. And it was 2 women, 8 men. And the statistics across the board within the industry, when you look at client-facing advisors, are pretty similar within the industry. Right. And so that's how I got into it. So it was really exciting that I could, sit for the exam and get it all done super fast. And so I ended up being a CFP MBA before age 25.
That's
and now
impressive.
I'm on a mission to help other folks achieve that at earlier ages, because there are more CFP professionals over the age of 70 than there are under the age of 30.
That's a wild stat, and I did not know that. And I think it's kind of scary, but it makes it even more important of like the work you're doing and how important it is, and I think it's interesting because I always love hearing how people got into the profession, because we get so many influences, and this is like, my brain works on two sides of like tech and then the behavioral side. Like that's how I feel like I flip flop on how I see the world. And I feel like there's so much influence from, you had like, all right, well, I got this accounting and this insurance side of it, but there's this bigger world that's now starting to open it up. So I'm so happy that we have the CFP programs in the university, and we can talk more about that here soon, because I want to get into like next generation conversation. But I think that I'm curious to hear your thoughts on like how we're going to keep moving it forward, because I was very much like you, that I did not even like, I didn't even know how, like what way to get in. And if it wasn't for one of the programs, that was the way I got in as well. And so I'm very grateful for those as well. And the two women that actually led that department from when I was there. So they're well retired, but they were amazing. So I love that though. So moving through your career path, and which I think is amazing, that by 25 you already had your MBA and your CFP. You would have been like, RFG would have been all over you to hire you and be like, who can we get you working with one of our advisors? Because I feel like more people need to come out that way, because these advisors are dying to like an advisor to bring into their practice. Like I hear it so often. So tell me more about your role at the American College, because I feel like you have such a unique perspective of what you're working on there.
Yeah, I like to joke that I'm a recovering advisor. So I worked at an RIA and a broker-dealer before coming to the college. And so I worked primarily, when I worked at the RIA, I worked more in the institutional client space, building DC, defined contribution, defined benefit plans. We would do a lot of the participant education for 401k providers, and then, endowment funds, et cetera. And there I really got a good deep dive into working with very diverse clients, because within participant education, I would talk with people with garnished checks the same day I would talk with someone who has a defined benefit plan or deferred comp plan.
Right.
And so you had to be up to the speed with a lot of different conversations.
Right.
Really enjoyed that space, but also wanted to explore being a client-facing advisor myself. And so ended up at a broker-dealer where I was working in high net worth space with folks with $1 to $8 million. Worked during COVID. And so, navigating some of my first primary clients through, a global pandemic and a very,
high
a market that
time.
was very volatile was like really stressful, which is where I find this like BFI space really fascinating to see like how clients reacted in that, if they wanted to make it steady, if they wanted, to change their portfolio drastically. And so I really love the behavioral finance side of that. And I've also had a deep passion for women and young women to get into financial services. So we talked about that gender divide, right. Not including non-binary folks across the board. It's like pretty close to like a 75-25 in favor of male, not including non-binary people. And my alma mater, I grew up in Utah Valley. And so there weren't a lot of women who were income producing outside of the home where I grew up. And so wanting to have a career and be a parent and, find fulfillment within a profession was kind of an anomaly. Yeah. And so I have volunteered at my alma mater. I'm going on my 6th year of hosting an event for young women and women interested in entrepreneurship, leadership, and finance. And really because I wanted them to like, if you can see her, you can be her, and finding folks that are just 1 to 2 steps ahead of you. Because a lot of the events that I went to, I was able to attend a lot of industry events in my undergrad. The women were too far away from me from their career aspects, right? Like they were CEOs or they were running their own firms. And I'm like, who's someone that's landed their first job? like I need to talk with them so I can know like my action plan of moving forward. So I've done this volunteer based for a number of years. And so one of the women that I graduated with, she works at the American College, and she said, we have this role for the Center for Women. We think that you would be great. We'd love to bring you in. And so that's when I pivoted from client-facing advice into the advocacy space. And that's really the mission of the Center for Women, which is to promote, advance, and advocate for women in financial services. And we do this through thought leadership, resources, continuing ed, curriculum, et cetera. And spoiler alert, I could make a lot more money being a client-facing advisor. I just am so deeply passionate about the underrepresented groups, which like women, even though, gender divides, we're like 52% of the US population.
Right.
But yeah, within financial services, we're considered underrepresented just based on like the statistics of how few folks are, or how few women are pursuing client-facing roles within financial services. And so that's when I pivoted. I've been at the college for the last 4 years, and it's been very fascinating to just see kind of corporate adoption of certain diversity, equity, and inclusion programs post-COVID, post the murder of George Floyd, and then kind of the pendulum swinging in a different way, like post the rollback of Roe v. Wade and post the rollback of affirmative action. So it's been very fascinating to be in this space and advocating across the board for all the different underrepresented groups, but primarily specifically in this capacity for women. And I think the passion and why I keep like going is that when you look at kind of what higher ed or getting a designation does specifically for women, there's a direct correlation to confidence, right? So credentials increases confidence and helps with women at higher rates. And so when you look at CFP holders, which the denominator of men is very large, so it's hard to like move the threshold of women who are becoming CFP professionals, but it's been 23% for the past 2 decades, despite all of these valiant efforts across many different organizations. And so it's how can we continue to grow that populace of women? And it's interesting because when you look at other professional services or other, advanced degrees of, doctors or lawyers or accountants, they've seen a big surgence of women going into those professions. But pop culture wise, you've seen that portrayed, right? You see more female doctors within, shows and movies, and you've seen lawyers and you see all of that. Versus when you look at pop culture, when it comes to financial services, it's very masculine, and there aren't very many female, female heroes within there. And so that's my job and responsibility. And I, how I phrase it is like all of everybody's like back burner items of like, I want to do that a community event or that LinkedIn post or something like that. Like that's what's the forefront of my mind. Right. And the college, I just love their mission, which is applied financial knowledge for the benefit of society, and how important, especially with this huge transition of wealth moving to women, that having female advisors and other client associates will really help foster a deep relationship, especially if we're talking like the trust component for clients moving forward. So that is what the work that I do at the American College. But as, an Enneagram 3 and overachiever, I actually I have a lot of other projects and initiatives.
We'll talk about those. No, I love all that. And I think that it makes me think, and I think anyone that's listened to me talk or the podcast or just knows me in general, they know that like my mind works in almost like quotes or movie quotes or music verses. But, whenever I'm a big advocate for the financial services industry as well. And I'm also an advocate for like where I grew up, I didn't know about financial advisor. I didn't even know what that was. And so I always try to, mentor anyone that's like went to the university I went to or anything like from the town I'm from. And there was a kid that I mentored years ago, and he was extremely smart, way smarter than me. ACT scores, like he was going to the same university I did for undergrad. His ACT was like a 35, which the perfect score is like 36 for everyone. I mean, he was brilliant, full ride, like genius, like had soup to nuts, had everything going for him, like in all And I remember always talking to him, and like the quote I used to always say to him is, the eye sees only what the mind is prepared to comprehend. And it's because because he had very humble background, both of his parents were just high school educators. His mind, he was only seeing like one level up. And I'm like, and I won't use his real name, but like, we'll just say his name was John. And I was like, that like, because he mentioned to me, he's like, oh, it'd be cool if I did this job. And I'm like, you could be the CEO of that, right? And it just like never clicked to him because he didn't come from that that economic background where he was aware of it. So like when you mention all that the work you're doing, I really believe in that because I saw it firsthand at a very young age of like male, female, whatever, gender, ethnicity. You've got to be able to you got to see it to believe it because you can do it without it, but it's going to be way harder. Whereas if you can visualize it and you have it like a lens for it, all right, well, I want to do this because I can actually see myself being it. So I love that. And you said so much good stuff there that I wanted to talk about, but I didn't want to interrupt you. You also mentioned the part of like the female side of, how we haven't seen a big uptick in our industry of it, but other industries have. It makes me think that, that this is a big initiative for RFG to the point where we're even hiring, similar roles. I don't know of any other role, like unless you're a monster-sized company that's similar to like what you're doing at the American College. It's an advocate for this, but it's something that Shannon Spotswood, our CEO, talks about all the time, that how she started to see the industry and how she started to get into it was because she got exposed to some of it at a very early age, and it helped opened her to get into hedge fund and investment banking, which I have no idea the percentages of that, but I would say it's arguably probably worse than the financial services industry on male to female ratio. But I always think that there's, you talked about like mentoring during like COVID and all these different political events. I remember reading two pieces of research that always kind of stuck with me is one, in those times of high stress like COVID, there was a lot of uncertainty, which every advisor listening to this knows that we deal with uncertainty in the markets, and trying to explain that to a client it's a job every day. And so in those times of uncertainty, women were more likely to leave their job and go be the caretaker, which was we've got to create a system. And this is something that I know Shannon's really passionate about here at RFG, because we have a lot of female leaders here, was creating an environment that allows that support system of it, that structure, and being like reasonable with it. We're not saying you're going to take off work for a year, but like giving some flexibility because of this thing called life. And then also the other one that makes me think of it when you were talking about all of that you're working on is and I've had this with like women I've worked with who are way smarter than me. And I'm like, why don't you apply for that job? You're killing it at this company, and this are in prior roles. And it's the one about confidence in applying for jobs. That one's always like stuck, like holds space in my brain, where a male would see a job, and if they can do like, I can't remember the exact numbers, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but it's something like 40 to 50% of like the job requirements, a male's like, I'm applying, I got this. Whereas like a female would need like 70 to 80% of the requirements to even feel like they could apply for the job, it's just crazy. Because it's like, there's it's not for today to unpack every single little thing, but there's just so much like behavioral science behind that, industry norms, environment of the workplace. Like there's so many layers. It's very multifaceted. It's not, I wish it was one solution, but I think that it's understated how much stuff, like how important the stuff you're working on is, because it's a big topic that I think some people are scared to talk about. Like a lot of these things people get uncomfortable with those conversations, but you've got to like call it out and be able to talk about these things, because it is the industry and we want to move it into a better direction.
Yeah, absolutely. And that confidence of applying for jobs. I think I read a study that is even higher. Like women are like 90 to 100 to 110% qualified
I was
before
understating it. Yeah.
Yeah, like before they will apply. And there's this really fabulous book called Proposals of a Feminine Economy, where a lot of the infrastructure was built on like, a patriarchal society, like system, right? Not saying it's good or bad, just saying like the time of day that we worked or the amount of hours we worked, and just kind of rethinking, abundance mindset versus scarcity, or,
Right.
How we view capitalism, and if there's like a more effective way to view capitalism. So it's been really fascinating going through this journey, especially because I grew up in an environment. I have 6 brothers, no sisters. And so there wasn't necessarily any of this like typical gendered roles in my household, because like anything my brothers did, I was also expected to do, like
Right.
pick up dog poop, change tires, like,
Right.
and vice versa. And so I think that's also probably why I'm such a feminist, is just growing up with that many men in my life. But for reals, it's like really wanting to help women see the bigger picture. And just like the story with your friend, quote unquote, John, this frequently happens with women where I heard this story once where this pilot is, welcoming these little kids onto a plane. And it's this little girl. And he's like, guess what? One day you could be a flight attendant. And she's like, or I could like own the airline, like this little teeny girl, where it's like, previously she's like flight attendant. That's the pinnacle of success. Right. Where like, nope, you could actually be the pilot, or nope, you could actually be the executive that owns and operates the airline. Like, it's just like rethinking and retraining our brain. And I think that's the abundance mindset that I really try to help folks within the Center for Women, but also within my work within Catalyst and Advisor Launch Lab, which I know we're going to dive into.
No, and I'll one comment I'll make on the time thing you said, like how our work days are structured. As someone who has kids, I wish that they would structure the work day closer to the school day or vice versa, because I'm like, who designed this? It's like, look, I love, Atlanta. I love New York. Like, I love Birmingham, like all the places that I frequent, those 3 quite often. And it's like, who designed Atlanta? Because there's like 50 different Peachtree streets. It's not built on a grid. And you're like, who designed the workplace for a kid to go to school at 7 a.m. and get out at 2? I'm like I'm starting my day for work, and then I've got 3 more hours at least of work still to do. It's like, could somebody like think through like why we designed it this way? Because I'm very confused, because it's always like, it's frustrating for someone. I mean, like for me that like sees this and goes, why, this doesn't make sense. Like, why, who did this? Like, and so when you mention that as like how the workday is, that's like a salient thing in my brain, because I have 2 little kids at 2 different schools. I have a spouse that works and, travels with work. So I'm always like, it's like we're playing back and forth, like which parent to do one. So it's crazy to me, but I think that having those conversations and even like thinking about it and making it that unconscious conscious, like of that conversation, it's not I think so many people feel it's like such a political and like awkward conversation. It's more of just like, let's talk about it, and there's no right or wrong in this conversation. It's like figuring out what's the best in general. So I love it, but I know I'm digressing on a conversation because I love talking to you about all this stuff. But tell me more about Catalyst and Advisor Launch Lab, all of this, because I purposefully have not asked you a ton about it because I want to hear it straight from you.
Yeah. So Catalyst, the inception of this was, there's a group of us women who have gotten together who really wanted to elevate people who are doing things differently within financial services, and especially from women, underrepresented groups, et cetera, where a lot of folks will just partner with someone because they always have, or
right,
they were buddies together and they've like golfed together or something like that. So how are, new emerging talent who's doing things differently and perhaps even better or more efficiently or more productively how are they getting recognized? And so there's a group of us, we call ourselves a collective, and we are advisor advocates. And so we help folks in a variety of different ways. One being is helping individuals land at the right firm for them. And this is especially important for female financial professionals where, there's the advice of like, you just got to stick out like in your career for 36 months. And after that, everything's going to work out. But where you land within the industry is so crucially important to the training and development that you have, but also like, are you going to be at a place that allows you to flourish, or are you going to flounder? And even going through a CFP registered program, and maybe you have a similar experience, is like, I could not have told you that like which companies within the industry are RIAs or broker dealers or hybrids or insurance-backed institutions or, wirehouses or fintech firms or whatever. And so, landing a job that could be a great compensation model for another candidate might be a terrible compensation model for that individual. And then they are self-selecting out of the industry because they're like, whoa. Like, I didn't want to sign up for this. And instead of, finding another landing spot, they're just like, I'm out. So one aspect that we do is we help folks land at the right places. And so that is really understanding the values of a group like RFG and aligning it to folks who align also with those values and compensation goals, right? Like there are a variety of ways that you can be compensated in this industry, whether it's salary, equity comp, commission-based, based on AUM, based on fee models, there's so many different ways, but like if you're not educated on that and you're not sure, so there's like an education component, which is why this group of women are together. It's to help folks make sure that they can land at the right places, or if they're somewhere and they're feeling like maybe this isn't the right fit, like let's make sure we can get you to the right place. So that's one aspect of Catalyst. Another product line is Advisor Launch Job, which is really around next gen talent. And that is helping independent firms hire and train next gen talent. So there are some firms that don't have great internal training programs if you're not with the home office. And so you have these practices that they might have like 300 million assets under management or up to like 10 billion, 15 billion. And they don't have an HR department, or they don't have specific training and development for these new advisors. And so they bring these folks in and they say, like, back in my day, I made this many phone calls per day. You're going to get this X amount of conversions. And then by that, you're going to have like at least 5 million assets under management in the next 90 days. One thing that's in there is like, when you look at the affluence of people's communities or centers, like of my center of influence, it's different for someone who might have come from a different community, maybe a different racial background, ethnic background, et cetera. So let's say I make 100 phone calls, just like that person, but I only have, like they had 10 qualified clients, I only have 5 out of my natural network. Right. And let's say if I grew up in perhaps an even more non-affluent area, I only have 2 qualified clients out of my 100 phone calls. And then it's like, how am I supposed to convert when my numbers are even fewer? And so it's like rethinking how prospecting works, niche marketing works, et cetera. So Advisor Launch Job is a training program that has an asynchronous coursework that you can take that goes through qualitative and quantitative aspects of being a financial professional, like qualitative side of like, how do you sell? How do you time management? Like, how do you manage a pipeline? How do you, the emotional intelligence that comes with being a financial advisor? Because you can go through a CFP registered program and you can know all the facts. And then you have you're sitting across the table from your client and their spouse dies. And then how is that conversation going? Like, it's a different conversation than just being hey, let's move the assets from the 401k to the IRA. Like, no, like we got to do a little bit more than that. So that aspect. And then the quantitative aspect of financial planning is that even though you know all the facts and you know the technology better than I do, but I took a class of like the technical applications of financial planning software. And it's like, you can put the best data in the world into a financial plan, but if you aren't able to articulate how that plan impacts the client as an individual, then like it's a waste of time and effort
Right.
and all of that. So it really is telling like how to effectively like build a financial plan and how to articulate that to a client to build value. So that's product line number 2. And then the third one is really this collective and community base. And that is really trying to find a platform and a place to highlight folks who are doing it differently and doing it well. So we have like a good friend, her name's Greer. She's a transition specialist. So if folks are moving from one broker dealer to another, oftentimes there is a transition team that's helping move accounts, et cetera. But sometimes it's like very clunky, right? Especially if you're moving from a broker dealer to an RIA independent space, like you have to get laptops, computers, like all new account forms. Like, are you doing this via DocuSign? And so it's like having an expert in that capacity and other folks that help with like designing website, like Josh Passler. And so it's just like elevating and highlighting the folks who are doing it differently. And really the like reason behind this is like the so what, like there's a business case, especially for having more female financial professionals, right? $30 trillion are transitioning to the hands of women. 100,000 financial advisors plan to retire in the next 10 years, which is 30 to 40% of the entire financial planning workforce, which is absolutely huge. And then you're shifting to a minority majority nation by 2050. So all those stats alone, it's like a great career path, but still folks are not, and especially women or underrepresented groups are not selecting this as a career path. And that's just really this like, how can we do it differently? How can we do it better? And how can we educate folks on the front end so that they can land at a place that they can flourish and not flounder? And we really like to use the tagline, not business as usual. So trying to do things a little differently.
I love that. And it's one of my things that, like the first category you mentioned of like finding the right fit, I cannot stress that enough. Like it's so real. That first category is so real to me because I've worked for some amazing people and I've also worked for some awful people. And I wish I could have dodged some of those, but I would say that some of those made me very insightful and learn a lot of like how not to do the business or how not to run an organization because of now I have, multiple I manage leaders of teams. And so it taught me how I don't want to be because of some of those people, but it's finding the right fit. I mean, I feel like that one's so salient to me because it's coming out, even though I did the program and the 2 women that were our like main people taught me so much. But there's so many different things, and I feel like there's so much value in that conversation because there's so many different paths that you could take. I mean, both of us are not your stereotypical path. We both have been in the advisor seat before, so we can empathize of like what that life looks like. But there's just so much opportunity, and it is kind of disheartening at times that when you see like people with potential and don't even like have a clue that like, hey, you could be killing it in the fintech side of it, or you don't have to be the one that sits in front of the clients every time. If you just like don't really feel comfortable doing that, talking about all of it and being engaging with that, there's amazing planners that make well into 6 figures, literally just being great planners for bigger firms. Like there's all kinds of different ways. And I mean, it's not for the chat today, but like technology is changing those roles every day. Like there's new types of jobs that get created every day in our industry. So I love all 3 of those. And, you talking about some of it, it made me think of last week I got to catch up with, I don't know if you know Luis Rosa that started the BLX program. And I was chatting with him last week about just like, the program that he created. And I just think it's so cool because I always remember I was at a large RIA in Atlanta and we were on this advisor network program and you could check a box like, do you speak a different language? And I mean, we're talking like it was a long list. It wasn't just the top ones of like Spanish, French, German, or whatever, like the most common ones in our country. But it was like a list and we had a few planners and we added them to the list and we were getting referrals from like all over the place because people wanted to talk to somebody that could speak their native language. And I mean, it was one of those like glass kind of shattering in your brain. And so it's so insightful for like people that are in the trenches every day. Like there is so much opportunity in that niche marketplace of that, and like giving opportunity. And also I got to comment on this other thing, because you said the 36-month thing. I don't know how many times I heard that garbage when I was like starting off, because I started in the broker dealer world, like a lot of like, I call it I used to call it like the dark side of it, because it was very like cutthroat. Just now there's a better path to doing financial planning, not the like, all right, Jordan, you're a financial advisor. Here's your business card. Go figure it out. And like, that's kind of what I got stuck with. Thank goodness I had some good like wholesalers and actually CSAs, like client service associates and practice managers that are predominantly female, were the ones that taught me the business, because I got just like thrown to the wolves. And just because that's the way they, like the advisors I work for, learned it, doesn't mean it's right. It's just, it's like saying rinse and repeat. Like, do I want to do the same thing over, or could we build something better? So it was, that one was always interesting. And it's funny you mentioned it, because it was so embedded in my brain that even in my academic research, I tried to find some like of value where this 3-year thing came from. And there's nothing. There was nothing out there. I asked all academics that are way smarter than me, and like, hey, have you ever seen any papers that are like validating this 36-month like lore in our industry? And I even had to state that it was lore in my like research paper, because the only thing I could find was the training programs from like Merrill, Morgan Stanley, like, you know, all the very like traditional broker dealers. Their training programs were 2 to 3 years. So like they would pay you a salary and then cut you out. And if you've got enough assets, then you'd survive. If you don't, bye. And that's why the turnover was so high in our industry. So, and I assume that the turnover for anyone outside, like a female or any other ethnicity, is probably even higher of it, because it's such a broken model. People don't even getting business by dollar for dollars. I see some value. Like obviously you got to get out there and get business. But there's so many other ways of getting it. I mean, there's one that comes to mind is like thinking about like your natural niche. And in a prior life, I worked with Kitsis, and this was like, you know, he's very passionate about this stuff, is like finding your network. And I just remember we had like an ongoing list of like all of the specialties, and it was wild to see all these specialties. And of course, you know, I'm you know, the based in Atlanta, so like there's Chick-fil-A. There's people that are actually, their niche market is to work with Chick-fil-A franchisee owners. There is an actual niche of tattoo parlor owners. And I was like, are you serious right now? Like there's people. And then the one that I remember seeing was this guy, you know, and it's because he, you know, he had sleeve tattoos, but he found his network, and like some people would be like, ooh, I don't want that guy in my office, because stereotypically they might think that that's going to turn away clients. And then there was another one that I always thought was interesting, was online fitness people, which always kind of blew my mind. I'm like, all right, everyone's got Instagram and sees, or TikTok and sees like all these like fitness, you know, influencers. This person's actual client base was just those people. And he said he got one client and then they referred them to everybody. And he's like, they have unique needs. Their cash flow is lumpy. Like they'll get 50 grand this month and then, 5 the next month, or 0. He's like, so you've got to talk a lot of cash flow planning. And I was like, are you being serious right now? And it's like, there's so much opportunity, but somebody like yourself and the group that you're working with has to cultivate and show the value in that, because the uniqueness of it is actually a value add and a positive to it. So I love it. And you're the 3 things. I feel like I need like a 1-pager now to share on that. So it's so good.
We can get you those. I would say one of the most unique niches that I've seen before too is people who work with individuals that have had twins.
Oh, I've never heard that one. Yeah.
Right? Where it's like, I only work with families that have twins or triplets, because it's like unique from like education planning, cash flow planning, etc. It's like super, super niche. So absolutely love the industry. Think that there's such a beautiful place for so many folks here. And there are some firms like RFG who are doing it right and really do care about their employees and their advisors and their clients. There's some bad apples out there, and people land there and think that this is what every place is like, which is not the case. And so that's really the education part of Catalyst, Advisor Launch Lab, and the work that I do at the American College.
I love it. And I think that sometimes we forget that our circles could be our influence of like what we think is actually the way we get like see perspective of the whole industry. And a lot of times I get kind of like, I always get a little reassurance when I either go to a conference or I go somewhere outside of like my normal crew of places. And I might even mention like, hey, have you ever seen this AI technology vendor or whatever? Or hey, have you ever heard of Brendan Fraser's, anything behavioral finance? And some of these people are like, what are you talking about? Like, what's behavioral finance? And I'm like, are you kidding me right now? Like, behavioral economics won a Nobel Prize, like, in 2002 or something. So like they won multiple ones. I'm like, have you not read this book? And they're like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And I'm like, are we working in the same industry right now? Like, I think we should be talking about, and it's crazy because I think that it's just so big. And then sometimes the realistic piece of, like we're at RFG, we're $5.5 billion right now. And I feel like, I feel like we're a big firm, but then you find out there's firms that I've never even heard of that's like 2 billion, 3 billion, all over the place. And it's like our industry is so big, and it's also so divided, like it's secluded, that you've got to keep pushing forward on some of the things because what we think and see every day might not be the whole industry. But I love it. All right. I know I can keep rambling on that, and I want to keep us on track, but I have one more big category I want to talk to you about before we go. And that is around the next generation talent side of it. So like you've touched on so much of it, and you've mentioned, and I've said it too, that it's a massive problem that we've got more people over the age of 70 that have a CFP than
under the age of 30.
Than under the age of 30, which is mind-boggling. And depending on the paper or whatever study from Fidelity, Schwab, Vanguard, whoever, the average age of advisor is usually around 60, and
yep.
It's always, so it's a very older industry and profession. And so how are you seeing like progress towards us achieving a more diverse, and even like keep going into like how you see like the future of it, like of ways for us to figure out to get people to actually join like the ways we did. We started from we actually joined the industry at a young age. Last time I saw Cerule's data on the industry, it was still like over 50% as career changers come into the industry. So like we still have a big gap of people that like want to become someone in wealth management, advisor or whatever it is. So I'm curious on your thoughts of like, we see it's a problem. How can we achieve more diversity in the space?
Yeah, it's definitely highlighted in a lot of the statistics. Cerule data, 70% fail out rate for new advisors too. So they're coming, if they do come here, they are failing out most likely because they have the lure of the 36 months. But the other aspect is like, there's just not an awareness behind it. And frequently I find with folks who are coming as career changers, there's some sort of life event that is the catalyst or inception for them moving into financial services, right? They have a parent die, they have a special needs child, they experience inheriting some sort of wealth, and they're like, I don't know what to do with this. And then they do a lot of due diligence, and they're like, oh my goodness, there's a career path. One cool thing that the CFP board has done in the past was they actually started going to the Girl Scouts of America conference to just show that it's a career opportunity at younger ages. And it's interesting because I work in circles with a lot of women, and there's actually some kickback of like, that's a waste of money and a waste of time. And it's like, wait, like those young girls and young women don't know that this is a career opportunity. And right. I was so fortunate that I went to a school in a state that required financial literacy to graduate from high school. So I was able to have an awareness of, some of the basics of and foundations of financial planning within my senior year of high school, where there were only like 35, it's skewing up, states that require financial literacy in high school. And in some of the states, it's like one class, right? Versus like a semester. So it's like, how am I supposed to remember everything? Like my whole life, I have not used the Pythagorean theorem. But I have had to file my taxes. So like there's this like mismatch. And so there have been efforts that I have partnered with to get financial literacy, education, well-being at earlier ages. The college just launched a complimentary course called Know Yourself, Grow Your Wealth. And that's really to understand how you feel about money and these money scripts and how that impacts your decision-making process when it comes to careers and other aspects. Frequently, I also find that firms are starting their outreach when individuals that are in college are in like their junior and senior year, and they've already made some like decisions that like lead them to one career path. So it's really about this idea of getting them at earlier ages. There's a great nonprofit called Rock the Street Wall Street, where they go into high schools and help high school aged girls learn more about, stocks, bonds, finance, et cetera. Savvy Ladies, they're a nonprofit as well. They have a helpline that women can call in and ask any financial related questions. One thing that we're doing at the college, we're actually launching our Gen Z's insights research study around how Gen Z perceives financial services. And for the folks who are just in their first 3 years of working in financial services, like their perceptions, and really understanding what people want coming into the industry and then what they're experiencing and the disconnect that's happening. And then our goal would be to build materials for firms to better bridge the gap between what Gen Z wants and what they're experiencing. So there are a lot of different organizations that are building awareness around careers in financial services. And through the research that we're doing at the college, we really want to help companies and organizations really understand this rising generation. But I've been at conferences for a lot of years, and the rising generation has like always been a problem. Even if you go back to like when the baby boomers were coming in and Gen X and Gen Y and all this, like they're like, we don't know what to do with these people. We don't know what they want. But Gen Z is very particular on their preferences. From our initial qualitative study, right, they find the industry very stuffy and old-fashioned. And with especially like the technology side and the work that we're doing, it's not necessarily that way when you are a client-facing advisor or even in servicing capacity. And so it's like really painting that picture for that rising gen. So I'm really hopeful for the industry. I think what will ultimately determine it is like when it gets painful and it costs firms money. We have this huge transition of wealth that's happening. In our research at the college, 70% of widows leave their financial advisor within 24 months of their spouse passing away in heterosexual couples. So you could see this. And then when that gets painful, that's usually when industries will adopt and change. And so for the companies that are forward focused like RFG and others, like they're making those changes on the front end rather than having to like really shuffle on the back end. And so I'm really excited. Like I mentioned, transition of wealth, all these financial professionals retiring. If I'm a young person coming in, I'm like, we got trillions of dollars that need to be managed, and people need to give away or going to like sell their book of businesses. And we're going to be a minority majority by 2050. Let's do it.
No, and I think that there's so many like nuggets right there that you mentioned, like as things are like changing, I'm always curious like where we're going and like where it's going to be of like how, because there's just so much is like, I feel like the industry is changing so much right now, just from technology, the way the advice is delivered. COVID, I think, sped up some of those too. Like people are okay with virtual calls more now than they were ever. And because it wasn't like some of the stuff was just brand new. And I mean, the thing with like phone calls, like I think that there's going to be a little lift in phone calls as well, because I was reading some research the other day of like the value of the tone of your voice and like voice, like talking is arguably more powerful than facial expressions and seeing someone in person of it. Like obviously live, us sitting, if we were together, would be the best. But if you had to choose between like a virtual or just like the voice, they say that voice is easier for like understanding tone and like what you believe and like all of those different things of like how the engagement of the conversation is, because our facial expressions, our hands, like everything can be misjudged, but our tone is very revealing and like the sincerity of everything, empathy and all of that. So I'm very curious to see where we're going. We're trying to do everything we can to just like give advisors the tools to move and progress where the industry is moving, because I think that there's going to be an even bigger shift with all of the change of the people in our industry, because it is going to be a little more casual. I know that was a big, like, everyone's like, oh, no more ties, like ties are out. And I'm like, I mean, if you want to wear a tie, wear a tie. I think it's less of like, you have to wear this. And it's like, wear something that you look professional, but like, you don't have to be fully suited up to be, you know, in the office. Like you can dress nice without having to be fully suited up. But if you feel like it, great, wear a 3-piece suit. Like I think it's more of like what's going to be comfortable for you, what's comfortable for the client base you work with, all of those things. So I think that's all. I love it. So I know I've kept talking to you about so many things, and I want to keep going, but I try to keep these a little brief where people can go in and explore more like all the things that you're working on. But at the end, I always like to end everything with a question that's like, well, actually, I'm going to add one in there, which I definitely haven't prepped you for on this one, but I got 2 questions. So one, the one I'm adding in, don't stress, is what book are you reading right now? Or what would you recommend? Or if you're not reading a specific one, but you have one that's like really salient in your brain, which one are you reading, or what would you recommend right now for people to read?
Currently, I'm reading The Mountain Is You by Brianna Wiest. She also wrote the book Pivot Year, and I love a good female author, but really around kind of exploration of kind of your mind's capacity and designing your own life. And definitely, as I stepped into my 30s, that was really a priority for me of why do we have a 9 to 5, and why am I rushing from place to place? And athletics has been such an important aspect of my life. And for the last decade, I haven't dedicated as much time or priority to that. And so it's like, how can I infuse, like I build my day around my workouts, and I build my day around my kids. And then anything that falls in there is like reprioritizing. So that's the book that I'm currently reading, and it's absolutely fabulous.
That's a great recommendation and a great like framework of like why, because I think that I had to learn that later in life too, where the like aspect of somebody, especially for athlete, speaking to athlete, like when you grow up in a certain like structure and you figure, like for me, my college experience was very different, whereas most people got to do whatever they wanted or had all the flexibility in the world. Or maybe they just had like a job, and that was that job in school, and that was it, or whatever. Mine was waking up at 4:30, going to work, like the whole like regimen of that. I found out real quick that when I added some of that to my like my life as an adult, it helped significantly like plan my day, happiness, fulfillment, and then like adding in the layer of children. I love that little nugget of just like planning around it, because I think that we forget about all that kind of stuff. And I was actually listening to a podcast of a executive business coach, and that tilts more into like the world of flow and psychology and everything. And they were talking about he's coached some of the top people in the world of poker players, celebrities, whatever. And so many of them have come back and said that it was almost too late when they noticed that their goals were not what actually fulfilled them in the like money tied with the world of it. Obviously, making a good income is very good, and like wealth is better at removing pain than giving happiness. But they noticed that some of the things about their life is what they were missing out on. And so I love that frame that you mentioned there. The other question I wanted to say is, I always ask this one because it's just a different perspective, but what is the worst advice someone has given you?
Well, I think the 36-month one is definitely some really bad advice. I've gotten some interesting advice as it relates to dynamics with feminine leadership of, in the past, there's advice to present more masculine or, conform, like just learn how to play golf because that's how you're going to get clients, or wear the Navy suit because then you're going to fit in and you won't stand out. And early on in my career, like I dyed my hair very dark and now I need glasses, but at that time I wore glasses and really tried to mirror like a masculine based sale process. And that's not me at all. So especially as a young woman coming into this space, trying to, find how I fit in.
Right.
I found through that process, like how I communicate with clients is definitely more an education-based sale. It takes a little bit longer. I get more details about their family and their upbringing and their money scripts and all of that. But then once you earn that client, like you get so many referrals from there. And so I think the worst advice was just to do it like the boys do it. And there's something so beautiful with feminine leadership and a feminine-based sales process. That's different. It's not the same, and it can yield the same or even better results. It just is, it's different. And so for some firms, they're just not familiar with what that looks like, especially if they have kind of a generation that didn't adopt that philosophy or mentality. So I frequently will tell women, and usually I'm usually not in black, but I wore a jersey today. But at events, I have crazy nails, I have butterflies all over me, I'm wearing hot pink or whatever. And I might get comments like, oh, you're really brave to wear that. And I'm like, I think that's an insult, but thank you so much. But really just channeling who you are. And the beauty of financial services is that you will attract the clients that like your style. And I frequently would do that with my clients. I'd be like, just find someone who's educated, competent, and someone that you like and trust. Right. And if it's not me, cool. I wish you well. Here are a couple of referrals, but these are what my clients like to work with me. So I think that's the worst advice. But I think the way to reframe it.
No, I think there's so much advice in being your authentic self, because if you're being yourself, then you're what you said, I'm just regurgitating what you said, but you'll attract the clients that you want to work with. And sometimes your sales process might be slower because it is, but your sales process might have been slower because you wanted to know more about them and deeper relationship, and you want that engaging relationship. But now that client is probably crazy sticky and they are never going to leave you because they're like, actually, Lindsey cares about so much about my family. I told her about this, this, and this. And I mean, those things, people, that's how you get a referral, is when somebody's they know that you care about them, and they know you enjoy working with them. And then the likelihood of when someone comes to them and tries to sell them on returns or something, they're going to be like, you know what, I'm good. She gets me, and it's a different level. But I would love to keep chatting with you, but we're going long, and I've loved our conversation, and I look forward to having more of them. So thank you for joining me on Game Film today, Lindsey.
Absolutely. We were in flow. So thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Game Film Podcast. Click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. Visit our website at rfgadvisory.com or schedule a call on our advisor's resource page. Content here is for illustrative purposes and general information only. It is not legal, tax, or individualized financial advice, nor is it a recommendation to buy, sell, or hold any specific security, or engage in any specific trading strategy. Information here may be provided in part by third-party sources. These sources are generally deemed to be reliable. However, neither our guests nor RFG Advisory guarantee the accuracy of third-party sources. The views expressed here are those of our guest. They do not necessarily represent those of RFG Advisory, its employees, or its clients. This commentary should not be regarded as a description of advisory services provided by RFG Advisory or performance returns of any client. The views reflected in the commentary are subject to change at any time without notice. Securities offered by registered representatives of private client services. Member FINRA, SIPC. Advisory services offered by investment advisory representatives of RFG Advisory, LLC, RFG Advisory or RFG, a registered investment advisor. Private client services and RFG Advisory are unaffiliated entities. Advisory services are only offered to clients or prospective clients where RFG Advisory and its representatives are properly licensed or exempt from licensure. No advisory services may be rendered by RFG Advisory unless a client agreement is in place. RFG Advisory is an SEC registered investment advisor. SEC registration does not constitute an endorsement of RFG by the Commission, nor does it indicate that RFG or any associated investment advisory representative has attained a particular level of skill or ability.